What do you think of if you think of Western movies? You know, that strain of films that were hugely popular in the 30s, 40s, 50s, into the 60s. The Wild West frontier of America. What sort of films do you think of then? Who do you think of? Do you think of John Wayne, Big John Wayne? Do you think of Clint Eastwood? Gary Cooper? Bet you think of all these sorts of people. You think of cowboys and Indians, although they're probably inappropriate these days. Films that we used to see on Saturday afternoons and Sunday afternoons, The High Chaparral, The Virginian Bonanza, all that sort of stuff. Probably you don't think of a 1966 Doctor Who story filmed at Riverside Studios in London, starring William Hartnell and Peter Purves. You don't, do you? Well, we're going to talk about Doctor Who and the Gunfighters. Welcome back to my world of stuff. Yes, Doctor Who and the Gunfighters. Before I talk about this 4-part serial, which I've rewatched over the last couple of days, I just want to say a big welcome and thank you to dozens of new subscribers who have arrived in the last week or so. You're all welcome. It's great to have each and every one of you here, and I hope you stick around, and I hope you'll like and subscribe and comment, because there's a real sense of community, I think, on this channel now. I'm getting some really nice comments every day, and as I mentioned to somebody just yesterday, I now have to spend about half an hour every day, some point in the day, catching up with comments that have been left and hopefully responding to them. As I do feel that if somebody's taken the time to leave a comment at any of my videos, it's the very least I can do is to respond and say something, even if it's just, hello, glad you enjoyed it. So if there's anybody out there who's left a comment and I haven't responded, I do apologise. It's just at the moment I'm getting a lot of comments, and that's great. There are certain videos that have sparked off this channel a lot lately, and I know that this is a retro channel now. That's what really thrives and really works on this channel. And there are certain things I've done over the last month or so which have really sent the numbers racing. So I'm so pleased to have you all here, and I hope you stick around because there's a lot more to come. And thinking about the sort of content I'm going to do for the channel, I'm quite excited to think about some of the shows and films I'm going to be able to cover. Favourite shows, favourite films that I've never really had a chance to write about or speak about before. And I'm hoping to put a few nice little video essays together to remind us all of some of the great entertainment from the past. And I don't mean by that there's no great entertainment around now. I think there's some fantastic stuff around. We're in a golden age of TV, and I love talking about that stuff. But this channel is more focused on the past because of the demographic of my audience. We're all getting on a bit. I think you all seem to enjoy being reminded of films and shows and things that we all enjoyed 40 odd years ago, but have forgotten about. So that's where this channel, I think that's the niche of this channel, and I hope that we'll have a lot more fun together going forward. So once again, thank you to everybody who's come aboard. Please stick around. Loads of great stuff to come. Please like and subscribe if you've just wandered in because you've seen Doctor Who. There's a lot of Doctor Who on this channel as well. Stick around and we'll have a good time. So, Doctor Who and the Gunfighters, 4-part serial from 1966. Very often decried in the early days of Doctor Who research and fan appreciation as the lowest rated Doctor Who story of all time, the least popular Doctor Who story of all time. Only half of that is true. The ratings were actually quite good. Started off with 6.5 million viewers, climbed to 6.6, dipped to 6.2, and ended at 5.7. Now those ratings really aren't bad. And we're not going to compare them with modern ratings, of course, are we? Because it's a totally different TV world now in terms of ratings. It's a different way of looking at viewing figures now. There's so many other things that we have to take into consideration. We all know that, don't we? Story actually did fairly well. However, what is noticeable about it, that it began a decline in Doctor Who's popularity in the UK, or at least it continued perhaps a decline which had been starting. Because the previous serial, The Celestial Toymaker, had at one point touched 9 million viewers. This story came along and the viewing figures dipped. I think that might well coincide with the fact that it was a Western story, realised in BBC studios in West London, and possibly wasn't hugely convincing, and perhaps didn't appeal to an audience that wanted monsters and aliens in Doctor Who, because Doctor Who was at this point struggling with its historical stories. They didn't have the same appeal as the monster stuff, which is why they were phased out just a few months later, in fact. But the story actually did quite well. But as I said, the ratings started to dip. And I think that's because we were at a point in Doctor Who's history now. It was Series 3. William Hartnell had been around for nearly 3 years. We'd had a lot of companions drifting in and out. The show wasn't new anymore. It was part of the TV landscape, as it were. New shows had come along and attracted the attentions of kids. Jerry Anderson's shows like Thunderbirds would have been quite big at this time. More explosive. I was going to say more colourful, but people wouldn't have been watching it in colour at the time. But Doctor Who was an old hand by now. It was 3 years in, and for a TV series that had been running pretty much all year since it started, it was probably starting to get a bit jaded and a bit frayed around the edges. I know that the producer, Innes Lloyd, who had stepped in, certainly felt that the show needed an injection of something, which is why at this point he was bringing in people like Kit Pedler, the scientist Kit Pedler, who later created Doomwatch, to give the show a bit more oomph, to make it a bit more scientific, to make it harder edge, because he felt it was becoming a bit whimsical. The Dalek Mania had sort of burnt itself out in 1966. The second Dalek film hadn't done as well at the box office as the first one. There was a sense that Doctor Who was not exactly getting a bit tired, but it was getting a bit over-familiar, and it was... the novelty had worn off, I suppose, is the best way to put it. After this particular story, in fact, Doctor Who's ratings under William Hartnell only climbed over 6 million once more, and that was in part 2 of The 10th Planet, which was, of course, William Hartnell's final serial, and the one that introduced the Cybermen. Now, because of the way Doctor Who was made at this particular point, it was made almost on a week-by-week basis. I don't think any decisions had been made or any particular concerns were being raised about William Hartnell's performance. He was probably at this point in the very early stage of the arteriosclerosis, which forced him to give up the role not long after this. But because of the show's schedule, they could make decisions fairly quickly about changing the lead character and bringing in somebody new. It's not like these days where there's a big hullabaloo when a doctor leaves and a massive gap before he appears. Television works in different ways these days. It takes longer to make things because they're slicker and they're glossier and they're more expensive. So at this point, William Hartnell was coming towards the end of his time in the series, although the audience wouldn't have known at the time. And the show was sagging slightly, certainly in terms of audience appreciation. And I think that's where the confusion comes along with the Gunfighters. It's the worst story ever, it's the lowest rated story ever. It isn't, because the ratings are okay, and certainly better than what was to come in the next couple of months, in fact. But the audience appreciation figures were very low for this particular serial. It wasn't popular. And in fact, the last 3 episodes of this serial were at that particular point the lowest audience appreciation index figures the show had ever had. So I think over the years, there's been a bit of blurring between low audience figures and low appreciation figures, and middling audience figures and low appreciation figures. But it symbolises a decline in the show's fortunes, which is, I think, a shame, because if you look at the Gunfighters in isolation, away from everything that came before and everything that came afterwards, it's actually quite good fun. It's written by Donald Cotton. Now, he had previously written The Mythmakers, which had written out Vicky a little while before. He clearly had a keen interest in historical stories and historical dramas. He had a good eye for the way people spoke in the eras that he was writing about. And I think it comes across particularly in the Gunfighters, because for all its production faults, it's authentic in terms of the Western type patois that we were familiar with from shows like Wagon Train and things like that. I think we'd have been aware of all this sort of cowboy jargonese that had been used in those shows and films over the years. And he picks that up very well and develops it all very well. And again, what's interesting about the story is that basically it concerns the Doctor, Stephen and Dodo landing in the Wild West at the time of the gunfight of the OK Corral in Tombstone. And they're there because the Doctor's got toothache because of the previous episode, the last episode of the Celestial Toymaker. He's now got toothache. Fortunately, Doc Holliday's in town. And the Doctor, Stephen and Dodo wander through the story, and it's interesting. It follows that basic tenet of the series, that you can't rewrite history, not one line. They've arrived in the middle of a significant event in Wild West history, and they can't influence it, they can't change it. They drift through the story, but what happens. There is a gunfight at the OK Corral. There is all this conflict between the Clantons and Johnny Ringo and Doc Holliday. But the Doctor and his companions, they just blunder into it. And although they get separated and they have their own little adventures and exploits, all they want to do is get back to the TARDUS and get the hell out of there. Get the hell out of Dodge. And it's actually quite a good, fun story. Bearing in mind also the limitations of the production. I mean, as I said, this was made I think it was made at the tiny Riverside Studios where a lot of 60s Doctor Who was done. There was some filming in Elstree, and I think you can tell that looks a bit bigger. It just looks, I'm not going to say cinematic, but it looks a little bit bigger than the tiny TV studio stuff. And there was also some filming done in Television Centre. But obviously, because it's a BBC studio production, it looks small. It looks what it is. It looks like a BBC staged drama. You think of westerns, and yeah, you think of the wide open spaces. You think of the prairie, the mountainsides, rivers, great Technicolor cinescope scenes of massive landscapes. This is all in studio, but for all that, I think it's fairly convincing. I know that some of the actors involved sort of balked at scenes where, certainly in the first episode, where they are riding down the main street of Tombstone on their horses, and they said that because of the painted backdrop, they had to turn off sharply or they'd crash into the backdrop. You don't really get an impression of that on the episode. I think the BBC, in a way, are to be commended for trying to do something that's so totally out of British television genre types. To do a western in a BBC studio takes a lot of guts and a lot of balls and a lot of nerve, and I think by and large they pulled it off, because the Tombstone set, obviously it's quite small. It's not a big town as it would be in a big Hollywood production, but you've got sort of interior exteriors of the town with the sort of the rickety buildings. You've got various different locations. Most of the action takes place in the Last Chance Saloon, more of which in a moment, which is just well realised in a typical Western movie bar style. It's a long bar, it's got a staircase leading to rooms where all sorts of activities would go on. It's got tables and chairs for the customers, it's got a piano. It plays on the stereotypes of what we know from Western films and TV, however realistic they ever were, I don't know, but it gives viewers what they would have expected to see from a story set in the Wild West. And you've got Doc Holliday's surgery, you've got various rooms and side rooms, so there's quite a lot of sets in it. And they're all very well dressed. The production design is great. I think Doc Holliday's surgery, it's got the big leather chair and it's got all the paraphernalia and the bedrooms. It looks like Wild West rooms that you see in films and TV productions with much bigger budgets. That's one of the things, of course, the BBC is always notable for, doing historical dramas with incredible authenticity. Usually things like the Victorian era and the Georgian era and so on. But here they managed to conjure up all the stuff of Wild West fiction to create this image, this illusion that this is a story set in the Wild West. And I think on those terms, I think it works really well. As I said, I think the script is really very good. It's very funny, very sharp. And I was watching it and thinking, well, this doesn't really feel like something for children, because there's no monsters, there's no aliens, it's gunfighters, it's the stuff of cowboys and Indians, as I said, without the Red Indians, or Native Americans as they're known as these days. It's very much based on this historic incident of the gunfight at the OK Corral. I think what lets it down, possibly, is some of the performances from actors playing the Clanton brothers. I mean, these are RP British actors putting on this American drawl, and some of them do it okay. Some of them are clearly uncomfortable doing it. But you are conscious of the fact that these are British actors. Again, the costumes are great. The costumes of the guns and all the stuff, the trappings, look really good and are convincing and authentic. I think that you have to sort of set aside the fact that these are British actors trying to play American, trying to play against type. And I think that seems a bit stiff now and again. There are one or two performances that are a bit laboured, some that are just not convincing at all. But generally, everybody's having a decent time. I think the best performance really is from Anthony Jacobs, who plays Doc Holliday. He just has the look. I mean, part of the plot, of course, is that the Clantons are after Doc Holliday. The Doctor arrives, people call him Doc, and they think that the Doctor is Doc Holliday. The Doctor's just blithely wandering through all this, just wants to get back to the TARDUS and get the hell out of there. But I think he plays quite well on that sort of stuff. And Anthony Jacobs' performance, he looks the part. He looks like this Wild West charlatan gunfighter dentist with his lover Kate, who is typical again of this big sort of busty singers or barmaids that you have in Western saloons and films and TV. And her performance is really good, and she really complements Anthony Jacobs. Now, Anthony Jacobs was quite a well-known or experienced actor. His son was Matthew Jacobs, who would in later life go on to write the script for the ill-fated Doctor Who movie in 1996 starring Paul McGann. And I think Matthew has recounted stories where he went on set to see some of the filming of this story. He has clear memories of going to see his father. I think his father was quite troubled. He suffered from depression and mental health problems, which you wouldn't see from watching this because it's a lively performance. He's clearly an actor relishing some very good dialogue. In fact, it's quite sharp dialogue, and there's some nice little bits of wit in it. I'm thinking particularly of the Doctor meeting Wyatt Earp and just calling him Mr. Werp. He calls him Werp. And my favourite scene is when Earp is taking them into the town to sort of, and he's warned them to be careful in this wild, hostile environment. And he introduces them to, I think it's the Clanton brothers. And the Doctor introduces Stephen as Stephen Regret, a renowned singer. Dodo is Miss Dodo DuPont, the Wizard of the Ivories. And the Doctor introduces himself as Dr. Caligari, to which one of the characters says, Doctor Who? And the Doctor goes, yes, quite so, quite so. I think Stephen Moffat would have approved of that because he loved dropping the Doctor Who bomb into his dialogue in his stories. One of the other things we have to mention, I suppose, is the Ballad of the Last Chance Saloon, sung by Linda Barron. This is a plinky-plonky sort of thing that they would have played in bars in the Wild West. And it's a good idea. It adds a bit of verisimilitude to the story. The problem is we hear it all the bloody time. Whenever anything happens, there's this refrain that tells us what's just happened. Somebody's been shot, somebody's been kidnapped, somebody's wandered off. And the song keeps telling us this at the beginning of the episode, 2 or 3 times in the middle of the episode, and then to play out the episode before the credits come in. And it's an amusing conceit to have a Western-type song as a backdrop to the drama. But I think it's overused a little bit. I think we could have done with perhaps a little bit less of it in the middle of the episode and just had it introing, outroing. But otherwise, I think it's quite good fun. I mean, you have to sort of look at it and say, and admire the audacity of Doctor Who doing something like this. And again, this is one of the great strengths of Doctor Who, that it can do this. It can tell a Western story. Doesn't necessarily do it well, but it has the format that allows the show to do things like this. And having said it doesn't do it well, I think it was quite entertaining. It doesn't deserve its reputation. It isn't one of those episodes that you'll pull down off the shelf and you think, I fancy watching Doctor Who this afternoon. You're not going to think, oh yeah, the Gunfighters. It's a curiosity in the show's canon, but I think that without shows like this, Doctor Who's reputation wouldn't be what it is, because the whole point of the series, it can do anything, go anywhere. And why can't it do a silly Western spoof with a silly Western song and silly performances from some of the cast? It's inessential, but it's actually a lot better than its reputation would have you believe. So if you've never seen the Gunfighters, or have seen it and thought, my God, I'm never watching that again, I would say give it another look, but with different eyes. I think if you watch it and just think, oh my God, this is a really tacky attempt to do a Western, you won't get out of it what is there. But I think if you can appreciate the clever script, which does a lot of heavy lifting and papering over the cracks in the production itself, pick up on those little gags, the nice character bits. Dodo who never gets a lot to do in the story. The scene where she tries to force Doc Holliday at gunpoint to take her back to Tombstone because she wants to be reunited with the Doctor and Stephen. And she's not the bravest character at the best of times, but when he sort of agrees to do it, she gives him the gun and faints. And things like that are quite amusing. And also, I want to give kudos to Peter Purves, who shows fantastic comic chops in this. His reactions, his double takes, his sort of little mannerisms. Great comic performance from Peter Purves, surprisingly. And William Hartnell in his element with this, because I know he struggled with the science fiction stories. And I think something like this, down to earth, with things that he recognised, historical figures, historical settings, he was much more comfortable with this. And although I think at this point you can see that he's aged from... He was quite sprightly in the first season or so. But I think, obviously, this was a show that was on 45 weeks of the year at the time. That's going to wear any actor out. And I think you can see that he's aging, but he's still very sharp. He's still a sharp Doctor, and he doesn't miss a trick. Even though they're in a situation that they don't want to be in, he works his way through it quite slyly, and his performance is lovely. It's a really nice performance for Hartnell. Go and take a look at the Gunfighters. Don't just listen to the fan reputation it has, because if you watch it for what it is very good fun. You wouldn't want Doctor Who to be like this all the time, but I think for just these 4 episodes, cut them a bit of slack. Right, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. A lot more Doctor Who stuff to come, I'm hoping. tomorrow that I'll be able to do my unboxing of the Season 7 Blu-ray box set. I did hope it would have come by now. It's been posted. It's in the system somewhere. And I know you've probably seen umpteen unboxing so far. But I like to do an unboxing. And of course, there will be an in-depth review of that set later in the week. So quite a bit of Doctor Who stuff to come this week. Plus, there's a very nice retro feature I'm hoping to be able to get out. I'm working my way through a classic TV series from my youth. Slightly different to some of the other things I've done recently. And I'm hoping to get that done some point during this week. Plus any other things that come my way. So stick around, plenty more stuff to come. As I said, if you've enjoyed this video and if you're new particularly, please like and subscribe. Subscribe particularly. I'm heading towards 1,900 subscribers at the moment. You know what that means? 2,000 is just around the corner. And I'm not taking the credit for it, but I feel so pleased if I could get to 2,000 subscribers. Of course, you're the ones who subscribe, but it would be a big thing for me to be able to say I've got 2,000 subscribers on my YouTube channel, because that's not something I ever envisaged when I started doing this several years ago. Things have really picked up in the last year on this channel, the last 6 months really. It's gone a bit nuts, and which is great, so I'm not complaining. So if you are new and you've just watched this because you like a bit of Doctor Who, subscribe, because there's more Doctor Who to come, loads of other stuff to come. And let's see if together we can get to 2,000 subscribers. Thank you for watching. I'll see you soon. Until I do. Oh, don't forget, incidentally. Sorry, I keep doing this. Don't forget, if you want one of these lovely, lovely t-shirts, there's a link in the description down below which will tell you where to get hold of one. They're not off the shelf. They're made to order, so they'll take a couple of days to get you, but they'll be worth it. So check out the link below to get yourself one of these marvellous t-shirts. Right, I'm definitely going now. I'll see you soon. Until I do, keep taking the stuff.